So hungry, I could eat a cow. Maybe even two. Speaking of which, look what magically appeared in front of me. Take a gander at those beauties. Here we have two ribeyes from very different breeds of cows. On this side we have our American Angus. Chances are, when you're walking through your local grocery store looking for a good, high quality cut of steak to cook up for dinner, that American Angus is going to be the one that you come across. Our friend here on the other side is much more rare. We have A5 Wagyu, imported straight from Japan. Wagyu is known for its marbling that makes it look like it was struck by lightning, leaving all of these beautiful little pockets of intramuscular fat. While they may be the same cut, there's obviously a very visible difference between the composition of these two steaks, meaning you're going to approach the way that you cook these two steaks very differently. So let's get into it. So first things first, every steak's best friend. Good old-fashioned sea salt. Normally, I like to salt my steaks the night before I'm going to cook them. That just gives that salt enough time to really get deep down into those muscle fibers and change around those protein strands. What that's going to do is lead to a much more tender steak and help it retain more moisture, so you're going to get a really juicy bite after you cook it. The salt isn't going to affect the Wagyu in the same way. All of that fat is going to keep it from really sinking out and evenly dispersing into the rest of the meat. You're also going to be cooking this in a different way, slicing each piece individually to perfect every bite. So I like to wait until then just to make sure that I'm putting the right amount of salt on this steak, as it's much more expensive to ruin a piece of Wagyu than it is a piece of Angus. So as you can see, the meat started to melt just from the body heat of my fingertips. So to prevent that from happening and just give you a nice clean cut in each of your slices, you can pop your Wagyu in the freezer for 20 to 30 minutes before you plan to cook it. That's also going to help prevent overcooking from happening. Whereas Angus likes to be left out for about an hour. That's just going to allow that to come to room temperature and help a more even and consistent cook throughout. That way you get a nice medium rare, maybe even a low medium if you're feeling kind of wild, but you don't end up with a burn on the outside and completely raw in the middle, or other mishaps from happening. See, look how much more crisp of a cut that is. You can see all of those beautiful little veins of fat. See, all of that intramuscular fat is going to be what creates a very tender, melt-in-your-mouth bite, which is what gives Wagyu that expensive price point. By cooking each piece individually, you're going to have a lot more control over how cooked it gets. That way you can enjoy the steak that you just spent an ungodly amount of money on, instead of wasting it away due to a couple minutes of overcooking. It didn't spend its days getting massaged and eating beer grains, gaining all that weight, just for you to render all of that fat out into the pan. You want that fat in each and every bite. You want that melt in your mouth finish that makes Wagyu worth it. So what are we waiting for? Let's get moving. Buttons. Get it? Get it, cows? So you want to preheat your pan and get it hot. I mean like scalding hot. What that's going to do is sear your steak and give it a nice browning. You want that crust, but still get it rare enough in the middle to where it's not completely dry and ruined. That Maillard reaction is what gives you flavor, and that's from all of the sugars and carbohydrates that are found in foods naturally to caramelize. The thing about Wagyu, you don't need to oil your pan. There's enough fat naturally in that piece of meat that's going to melt out as soon as it hits that heat. Look at that. Now just take a nice sea salt, sprinkle a little bit on there. Ooh, look at that. I say 30 seconds or less on each side. You just really want to watch it and be sure that you don't overcook. Look at all that fat. This is quality control. Can you just feel that like liquid gold running down your throat? Tastes like luxury. I can't wait. So this is our Angus that we salted last night. All of that salt has made its way through the muscles, so it's going to be evenly seasoned throughout. You're going to do the same thing that you did with the Wagyu on a real high heat. You want that sear so you develop that really beautiful golden brown crust. Now normally I would oil the pan before cooking this, but because we used that same pan to sear our Wagyu and it rendered all of that gorgeous fat, we're going to use that fat to cook this steak. Just really get it nice and even on there. At this point, if you want to add a little cracked pepper, feel free. That crackle that you hear, that's all of the moisture evaporating from the surface of your steak. That's what you want. It's when your heat isn't high enough that instead of evaporating all of those little water molecules that are making their way out, they get trapped at the bottom and just kind of simmer. So if you want to err on the side of safety and you're not comfortable just eyeing it or feeling it out, you can use a meat thermometer to check that temperature. So for medium rare, you want the middle to read about 135. So at this point, you can go ahead and add about half a stick of butter, 4 tablespoons more or less. I have a huge piece of garlic that I just cut in half. You throw those in. Oh my god. Oh, she's looking pretty. So just give that a little butter base. In this bowl, I have about 1.5 teaspoons to maybe 2 teaspoons of minced garlic. I have a heaping teaspoon of gochujang, which is a Korean fermented chili paste. And I have about 1 tablespoon, maybe a little more, of white miso. So we're going to make a pan sauce with this that you can use with your steak. So first we're going to put that ginger in. Just cook that down a little bit. Actually take these out now, save them. I like to kind of squish these. I don't know if that's the culinary term for it. I like to smash up my roasted garlic that's been simmering in that butter, in that browned butter. All of the milk solids, by the way, that were in that butter that we basted with are going to be nice and toasted just from that heat that they've been getting from the bottom there. And that's going to add a really nice nutty flavor that I think works well with the miso. And then just whisk all of those together like your life depends on it. And now you're going to deglaze with just a splash of some rice vinegar, or rice wine vinegar, mirin, and just get that smooth and emulsified. I'm also just going to add a splash of water just so it's not quite as intense, and that liquid is going to Thin out your sauce. Drizzle in just like a teaspoon of honey. And then whisk that as well. You don't want that to burn. By now, your rice should be fully cooked. You can take that off the heat, and I'll show you what to do next. I think when it comes to Wagyu, you have so much fat as is that you kind of want something to balance that out. In more traditional Japanese fashion, keeping your rice just the way it is, or even just balling it up into a little nigiri base and laying that Wagyu on top of it is perfect. But by all means, I mean, it's your world. I'm just living in it. If you want to make crispy rice and then combine the Wagyu with that, feel free. But I do think that the Angus pairs really nicely with the crispy rice and a sauce. So I'll give you both options. So now we're going to make our crispy rice. If you are fine with just eating white rice with the Angus, by all means it is still just as delicious, especially with that sauce that we made. But if you want to take it one step further and put Nobu's crispy rice to shame, I'll show you how to do it. So you're going to take your steamed sushi rice. Ooh, there we go. Get a nice scoop there. And then I'm putting it into a bread loaf pan. But if you don't have that laying around, any pan that's about 1.5 inches at least in depth, even just 1 inch in depth, you can make it work. That has those flat sides, just lightly grease it, and then I lay down some parchment paper for extra security, just to make sure it doesn't stick, but honestly with just a neutral oil you'd be totally fine. Now take it and just spread an even layer. You want to get it, I'd say just under 1/2 inch, maybe around 1/2 inch high. I like it pretty thick because that gives you a good ratio of outside crispy with inside soft. I found that a lot of places that do crispy rice, you just get too much crunch and it feels like you're biting into a cracker and your teeth kind of hurt. And it's not a pleasant experience, and I feel like everybody's just pretending to have fun. But you can make crispy rice really, really good. It's just all about nailing that ratio. So give it a little swish. So now that you have that in there in that pan, like so, if you don't have a pan of equal size to the one that you just put your rice into, you can just put that parchment paper down and give it a good squish with your hands. Just really lean into it. Take out all of your frustrations from the day on this poor little bed of rice. But if you do have a pan similar in size, just lay something down there because I didn't really cover the ends, but you don't have to do that. That's just a little extra safety. Put that pan in that other pan and then press all of your weight into it. And then let that cool. Just ignore it for like 15-20 minutes. If you're in a rush, just pop it in the fridge. Leave it alone for like 10 minutes. That'll cool enough to where it'll kind of solidify as long as you put the right amount of pressure on there. If you don't, and you just kind of, put it into squares and give it a little push without letting it cool, it will just fall apart as soon as you try to cut it, and fall apart even more into just crumbly little pieces in your pan as soon as you start to fry it. And we don't want to waste all our hard work, do we? See you in a few. So now that our rice has cooled to a nice solid block, hopefully, we can take that top pan off, unwrap these, and just act fast. It can smell your fear. And there we have it. Just unwrap it like Christmas Day. And that's the kind of depth that you want. You don't want it too flat, otherwise you're not going to have a nice inside. So here, just dip your knife in water, and that's going to keep the knife from sticking to the rice as you drag it along. I like it about just under around an inch thick. And then just chop straight down. Or actually, let's see if we can rinse each time. That'll also kind of get some of that rice off. And then just repeat this all the way across. Try to get it as straight and even as possible. You can also do all kinds of different shapes. If you have a little cookie cutter, you can press right down with that. Get a disc that you can top up high with anything that your heart desires. Flip this, just go right down. I just got a jar here. I know it's weird just dunking a knife into a jar of water, but it saves you the trouble of going back and forth from the kitchen sink over and over again. But if you're doing this next to the kitchen sink, you can always just run it through the faucet. You can also trim off the edges just to give you, extra rice doesn't hurt, but it does look nice having that crisp, clean edge. You're also going to get a lot more even of browning if you just get that nice and crisp. While we're waiting for our oil to heat up so we can fry these bad boys, I'm going to go on a little rant about something I feel very strongly about, and that's the fact that Wagyu burgers are a sham. If you really think about it, any burger that you eat that's made out of ground beef, you have full control over the amount of lean meat to fat ratio that you get in that burger blend. So if you're blending up Wagyu beef, you kind of destroy the whole magic of that marbling that you pay such a high price for. Kobe burgers were a huge trend, but Kobe beef itself has such a high fat ratio that if it actually was made up entirely of ground up Wagyu, it would melt in your hands before you could even put it on the pan. If there is any Wagyu at all in that burger that you just paid way too much money for, it's probably just some fat scraps off of someone's expensive steak that they threw into a ground beef blend that honestly would taste pretty much the same if they used a much cheaper fat from any other cow. Instead of spending your money on ground Wagyu beef, learn to make your own blends and custom tailor it to the amount of fat that you like in your burgers. You'll get that exact same juicy, flavorful bite for a fraction of the cost. And with that money that you saved, you can spend it on a real Wagyu steak. Let's go see how our oil's doing. So now it should be pretty hot. You can always test that. Take a little bit of our water here and just... Oh, she's ready. Huge mistake that people make when cooking crispy rice is that they don't fry it at hot enough. You want it hot enough that it'll create that nice even layer of crunchy golden brown while still leaving the middle nice and soft. Let's start with these because these are the prettiest. Look at those crisp, clean edges. Actually, just on this side. Just look at this side. This one's good. Okay, just right there. Ooh, that is the sound we like to hear. You just want a shallow fry. They don't need to be too deep. While those are cooking, just grab a plate that's lined with a couple of paper towels. That's going to absorb any extra oil sticking around on those fried, delicious little pillows of love. All that crackling that you're hearing is the moisture in that rice evaporating and creating that beautiful crust. Now they should look a little bit like that. How beautiful are those? So now that we have our crispy rice, our steaks, our dipping sauces, and a few of my favorite toppings, let's put this all together, shall we? So first I want to cut into this lovely Angus that we have. Oof, look at that. I would personally have liked this a tiny bit more rare, but that's just me. It's still going to have an amazing flavor. Now you're going to take your steak, put it right on top, give it a little drizzle. Look at that. I think I'm going to go a little simple with that first bite. Don't want to overpower it. Took some green onions. I also have some kimchi here, a little furikake, which is kind of a blend of stuff. I can't pinch things with my nails, but we're gonna make do. And then I like the flavor of black sesames, which I don't have in this blend. So I'm just gonna add a little sprinkle of that too. Look at that perfect bite. Mmm. 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 Mama still got it. Oh, that's good. Nobu could never. You know, I know that I said that Wagyu is already fatty enough and you don't really need to eat it with crispy rice, but you can. So I feel like we should probably just give it a try anyway for the sake of indulgence. This one I feel like we should do a little bit simpler. I don't want to overpower all of the delicious flavor that Wagyu has on its own. I'm just going to give it a light dip in some soy sauce. I take it back. Eat the Wagyu with the crispy rice. Holy shit, that's good. Like the soft, juicy texture of the Wagyu just melts into that crispy rice. The like combination of textures, just that contrast is absolutely insane. That is euphoria in a bite. That is what euphoria tastes like. Euphoria is Wagyu beef and crispy rice. That is a good steak. And I know good steaks. See, I'm pretty lucky. My parents are cattle farmers, so it's not my first rodeo. But you have to recognize delicious when you taste it, and that very well might be one of, if not the best bite I've ever had in my life. But Wagyu is not just delicious. It actually has the potential to revolutionize the entire way that we raise cattle around the world. Why is it that we're only now hearing about Wagyu? Why is it such a huge trend in the past 10 or so years? See, since 2012, when Japan finally started sharing its happy little cows with the whole world, the demand for Wagyu has skyrocketed, and I think we can taste why. However, people forget Japan is just an island. They only have so much space. And I think that's a big part of why they went the route of quality over quantity. But someone's got to make sure that steak stays on the table. That's why we're seeing more countries like Australia and America experimenting with Wagyu of their own. See, some farmers, my parents included, have been leaning more towards grass-fed beef for a variety of reasons. One of those being that it is healthier eating more natural beef. There's a lot of corruption in the cattle industry, and it's nice to know that cows are grazing on some things that they're supposed to. And then there's the environmental aspect. Unfortunately, a large portion of the beef that we consume comes from feedlots run by unsavory corporations that don't have the most ethical ways of going about things. This has led to erosion, deforestation, and a massive carbon footprint just to maximize their profits. But that doesn't have to be the way that things are run. Regenerative farming is picking up steam amongst local farms around the US. Part of this involves rotating cows into different pastures regularly, allowing the grass to be fertilized and grow, which keeps not only the cows healthy and nourished, but also the earth. But there's something holding us back from taking steps in that direction. See, farmers want a more profitable product. They spend a lot of their time, energy, and their own money to make sure that we can access delicious beef. And there's a far less demand for grass-fed than there is grain-fed and grain-finished, which is what we see in most mass cattle production. See, only 3% of the world's population of cattle is grass-fed. Grass-fed tends to be a lot more lean than grain-finished. you don't get much marbling or intramuscular fat, which is what makes this melt in your mouth delicious. More farmers are opting to crossbreed Angus because of its affordability and because it's much easier to access with the highly marbled Wagyu. Many believe that the way that we produce cattle is unsustainable in the long run, and in the next 100 years or so could end entirely unless we change things. Wagyu crossbreeding gives us the possibility of getting the best of both worlds. A healthier earth with greener pastures, and a future where marbled melt-in-your-mouth steaks still exist. Who doesn't want that? And that being said, I'm getting sleepy. I think I'm going to take this with me, lock my doors, head to bed, and pray that Peter doesn't come for me. Sweet dreams. I'll see you soon.